everyone. Just give it another couple moments here as people pile into the meeting room. So hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us on this rainy Tuesday evening. My name is Ashley Honsberger. I'm the Executive Director for Poultry Industry Council, and I'm pleased to be hosting this high-path avian influenza situational update for Ontario small flock stakeholders. This is a series that we're kicking off again because unfortunately we find ourselves in the situation where AI has returned to the province. Actually never left, but it's in the flocks that we're monitoring closely. So we will be continuing on doing these Tuesday night updates every Tuesday until sometime into December. Just wanted to point out that we were very generously given a grant to offer this series through the CAP funding program. So we're working in partnership with OMAFRA to make sure we get the best information out there in a timely fashion. So just a moment about Poultry Industry Council. Of course, we are the education, extension, and outreach organization in Ontario. We primarily work with the commercial poultry industry, but we're expanding our gaze to the small flock to help out during this situation. We do offer resources, training, and webinars, and we've also taken on a bunch of strategic projects over time. So I'm just going to take a couple minutes to kick off with a new resource that we've launched that's now live and free, and it's going to help people in the poultry sector get some plans in place and mitigate some of those risks that happen around the farm. So it's a guide, as I mentioned, and how it all started out was in binder form. So Ontario Pork developed the emergency planning guide for the pork producers, and then OMAFRA took it on and changed it into a poultry focused resource. Then they gifted it to us to do what we wanted with it. So basically we made a new paper version of it, and we've also made a robust online version as well. So the purpose of it is assess your risks, document the plans, and communicate the plan to your team. So what's new in the guide beyond being a binder? As I mentioned, we do have printed workbooks available to Ontario poultry producers. We've also got all of that content online in small crunchy pieces, so you don't have to eat the whole elephant at once. You can take the different various emergency scenarios, learn about them, and create some planning documents around them. And we've also created an app. So it's called the MyFarm app, and I kind of think of it as a vault. So it's a space where you can store all of your essential emergency information, such as contacts, what equipment you might have available, all those sorts of things. So I'm just going to really quickly buzz through what some of the features and benefits of this new resource are. So as I mentioned, when you go onto the main website, you click on this emergency planning, and where you're going to end up is here. This is all the chapters, all of the sections of the resource broken out by subject. So if we just hone in on one, something that might be useful in these days is having a dead stock or mass mortality plan in place. So there's all the different things you need to consider when planning for that. We've got really great videos from experts, including Aldam, but experts from across the industry who are sharing their insights and some of the things to consider when you're planning. Returning back to the homepage, the MyFarm app, as I mentioned, it's a vault. So it's something that's going to take a little bit of time to populate, but you can put in some information, save it, and then come back later. And this is kind of what it does. So it gives you the opportunity to self-assess all of the areas of risk on your farm. You can store all of your emergency contact in one place, and you can create tailored response protocols for all of the various emergencies. And I just say that with a caveat that it's not meant to store your secret passwords. There's other apps for that. This isn't the one. So when you do create your farm, so these are my fake farms that I invented. So you can see you can create it for different properties. And then when you go into it, all of your information's in one place. And in the top right-hand side, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but you can see the self-assessment and other response procedures are tucked up into this top right response procedures tab. You can have a virtual visitors log, all of your essential contacts. So as Tarina likes to say, you could be on the beach in Florida, something could be going down on your farm. All you have to do is log in and pull up the information, pull up the protocol, share it with the folks back home, and hopefully you can help out. I'll also just point out we have a couple of lunch and learns planned. This information is available on our website, but the first one's this Thursday. So we've got PIC talking, we've got Aldam talking, and we've also got Randy Drysdale, who's going to talk a little bit about insurance mechanisms to keep your farm lined up and ready to go in case anything happens. So again, another free website. It's a really great opportunity to learn something different, spend some time with some poultry colleagues. So this is kind of how I would sum it up, is to give your future self the gift of being prepared. So all of these resources are available through this website, and everything you can access through the main PIC site. So back to tonight's agenda. Just to let everyone know, if someone mentions a link or a map or a resource or a phone number, we've collected all of those assets right here in this Biosecurity and Disease tab on the Poultry Industry Council website. We're working our best to keep all that information up to date, so don't feel like you have to scribble a whole bunch of notes down because everything's right there for you. And how tonight's going to go. So as the topic mentioned, we're just going to look back a little bit, look back over the last 6 and 7 months to see how things happened, looking ahead to the fall, what's happening right now, just a bit of a situational analysis. From the perspective of Canadian Food Inspection Agencies, we've got Vaishnavi and Cassandra joining us. From OMAFRA, we've got Dr. Luci and Aldam. We're also joined by Dr. Brian Stevens, who's going to share the wild bird perspective. And then we're going to do a live Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, we did collect the initial feedback of what people were looking to talk about or learn about. So that should hopefully be covered by our speakers. But if we missed something, feel free to use that Q&A button down at the bottom. Thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Vaishnavi.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here, Ashley. So I'm joining today from Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and I have Cassandra from our control teams branch to answer any questions that we might have. So just wanted to give a quick update on what's been going on currently in Ontario. So with the fall wave, we had 4 new IPs in Ontario, one with a PCZ, the other 3 didn't have a PCZ. Now, the question might be why? That's because CFIA determined that the first one was a poultry, whereas the other one were non-poultry. Now, this determination is based on World Organization Animal Health Standards, and one of the key criteria is around sales of products or birds. So if there's a non-poultry determined, you won't have a primary control zone. Now, the primary control zone is basically a 10-kilometer radius from the infected premise, where a mapping is done, and all the basically farms, food mills, everything like, so our mapping team kind of includes everyone that can come into that zone who has to follow certain permit requirements and movement requirements. In order to get from out of the primary control zone, you have to follow a post-outbreak surveillance for the revocation of the PCZ and the related movement controls. Now, post-outbreak surveillance activities can start in a PCZ as soon as the CFIA has confirmed the completion of primary decontamination of the infected premise, or the last infected premise if there is more than 1 premises in that primary control zone. Now, primary decontamination is basically the removal of contaminated materials and products and dry cleaning to remove visible organic material. Usually this post-outbreak surveillance in a PCZ takes around 28 days before the primary decontamination, after the primary decontamination is complete. And then if everything goes well with the papers and also the post-outbreak surveillance, we revoke the PCZ. It's a different structure. It not always goes the same way with every infected premise and primary control zone. So there's a pathway to it that you can go online and look into it. So if you have any questions, just visit the Canadian Food Inspection Agency website, and you can go under avian influenza, and it will give you all the details of how the pathway kind of works, and also what permits and movement control requirements are required for different infected premises, and also what kind of materials you're trying to move. So if you're moving eggs out of the infected premise or primary control zones, the permit requirements are different compared to moving a live poultry outside the PCZ. So that's pretty much like what we have been doing. If there are any questions regarding movement control, feel free to reach out to our movement control team, or just try to reach out through your local organizations, and they can reach out to CFIA, or go to the website and you will get all the details that would be necessary. As Ashley said, prevention is the key here. So I would really recommend for the future to just try the preventative measures. That's also listed on the inspection.gc.ca website on how to control for your small flock areas. So yeah, if you could follow those procedures, that would be great. And we basically appreciate any help that the producers can provide us in controlling avian influenza in Ontario and overall in Canada. Thank you, Ashley. I'll give it over to Cassandra if she wants to add anything from CFIA standpoint before we go further. Thank you.
Hi there. No, I am the movement control lead for here in Ontario. So we are in charge of the movement of poultry and poultry products, either into, out of, or transiting through any of our PCZs or our control zones. If anybody has any questions regarding that, that's kind of why I'm here. I'm a resource for you to answer, or for answers, sorry. And I would encourage everybody to just reiterate what Vash said, encourage everybody to check out the inspection.gc.ca website under avian influenza. The movement control area has a wonderful set of drop-down menus that can guide you as to whether or not you should get a permit, what type of permit you would need. And there are links there to those permits that you can fill out and send in to us. Thank you.
Thank you both. That's a really great overview of your role and kind of what some of the parameters are that we're working around. So now we're going to move provincially and hear from Dr. Luci.
So good evening, everyone. The webinar journey started 6 months ago on March the 10th, and I can't believe where we are today in terms of virus spread, but also in regards of communication and information. At that time, Ontario had no outbreaks, as the first case was declared on March 25th in a commercial turkey farm operation. To mention that the Ontario poultry industry and OMAFRA continues to be kept aware of situational status through various communication channels, and ministry specialists continue to promote the importance of biosecurity in mitigating the risk of introduction of the virus in the flocks. So why the avian influenza outbreaks are of concern? Of course, increasing the disease outbreaks means increasing the risk for Ontario. First of all, it's not a food safety risk, but you have to keep in mind that it's a zoonotic disease and low risk to general public but can spread to humans that are in direct contact with live birds. Low pathogenic H5, H7 viruses can evolve into highly pathogenic viruses. There is a significant threat to birds' health with high mortality in domestic poultry, especially turkeys and chickens, and the rapid spread between farms and flocks if strict biosecurity is not in place, plus serious production, economic, and trade losses. And migratory birds are reservoirs for avian influenza viruses, but they're often asymptomatically. So risk increases with the spring and fall global migration. A quick reminder about the avian influenza virus and what we've learned so far. The current high-path avian influenza virus, it's a Eurasian lineage, H5N1, with the first detection in December 20th in Newfoundland and Labrador and January 13 on wild duck in South Carolina. We learned that the incubation period for this virus is being estimated to be 2 to 5 days or even shorter after the exposure to sick or dead poultry. As far as transmission, we learned that this virus is capable to infect a lot of species of wild birds, but also have been detected in 84 individual mammals of 11 different species, and this demonstrates the ability of flu virus to mutate or reassort with other flu viruses with the potential for interspecies spread. The main transmission to the domestic flocks was related to introduction of the virus from wild birds and breach in biosecurity. We're moving to the status of Canada and Ontario. You can see on the right side what was in March when we started to present these webinars. We've had 2 commercial flocks in Canada, both of them in Nova Scotia. and no outbreaks in Ontario. And then we've had 2 small flocks in Newfoundland and another one in Nova Scotia. And on the left side, here is where we are today with 70 active infected premises in Canada and 71 already released, affecting a total of over 2,700,000 birds. Again, with the status of the avian influenza, the new outbreaks, since September 4th, Canada has reported about 29 commercial poultry flocks testing positive for avian influenza in Alberta, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario. And for Ontario, since September 17th, we've had confirmed 4 infected flocks, and these are the first cases of avian influenza in domestic flocks in Ontario since May 18th. On the right side, you'll see as of September 18th, these are the remaining control zone that are in place. We have 9 in total. The distribution in North America, again, because I made a comparison between March and September. If you look at the maps, this was what we have in March on the right side, and then this is what we do have right now. A lot of dots, and then this represents commercial, non-commercial poultry, and wild birds. United States confirmed in March about 27 outbreaks in 15 states, affecting over 3 million birds. Look at what we are today with 40 affected states, 468 confirmed flocks. Among those, 248 backyard flocks and 220 commercial flocks, affecting over 46 million birds. As across Europe, highly pathogenic avian influenza continues to be reported in domestic poultry and wild birds, with an increase in number of poultry outbreaks in the last few weeks. The 2021 and 2022 highly pathogenic avian influenza epidemic season is the largest epidemic so far observed in Europe, with a total of 2,398 outbreaks in poultry, 46 million birds destroyed, and 2,733 events in wild birds in 36 European countries. It was estimated that 86% of the poultry outbreaks were secondary to due between farm spread of high pathogenic avian influenza. And between 6 months prior period, the number of affected flocks and detection of H5N1 have been increased significantly. You can see the maps between March and September. For example, Europe had 2,196 cases in March, and the number doubled in September to 4,381. North American continent experiencing a 10-fold increases numbers from 267 in March to 2,816 outbreaks. About 2,455 cases across the world was detected in March, and then they've been increased to 7,435 in September, and represented the majority of avian influenza detection, H5N1. We're going to talk a little bit about the new Ontario Ministry's order. There have been a lot of questions about it, and the recommendation is based on confirmed cases of highly pathogenic avian influenza subtype Eurasian strain H5N1 in domestic poultry in Ontario, as well as the large number of known commingling events scheduled for the months of September and October with agricultural fairs. Effectively, September 23rd, the order temporarily prohibits events where birds commingle, such as bird shows, bird sales and swaps, portions of fairs where birds are exhibited, sport and educational displays where birds are brought from multiple locations, vaccination gatherings for birds from multiple locations, and prohibits the movement of birds to those events. Temporarily reducing direct contact between birds from different locations will limit the spread of avian influenza and protect flock health. Like I said, the order has been issued on September 23rd and is valid until October 22. On the right side, you do have phone numbers and information that you can report if there is any noncompliance of this order. The minister's order under the Animal Health Act 2009 was issued for the purpose of limiting the commingling of the birds from different locations in Ontario to reduce the likelihood of disease transmission in domestic birds by limiting direct contact. The order covers all known bird species raised for food, display, or pets, bird species used for sport, protection, including all commercial and non-commercial poultry, zoological or other display poultry, birds housed in at wildlife rehabilitative facilities, and personal pet species. Of course, the prevention is the key, and I do strongly recommend not to attend the shows and sales and swap meets during this high-risk period, especially with the fall bird migration. You know, as during an avian influenza outbreak, attending poultry events can increase the risk of spreading diseases, and they are most often transmitted from one infected flock to another by infected birds, contaminated people, or equipment. Transferring the virus between the birds to a new location, and if infected birds are moved through an auction or swap meet, then the virus can be transferred to multiple new locations. They may be birds that appear to be healthy, can be infected, and can transmit the virus to other birds before exhibiting any signs of disease themselves. I do have a slide of who to call if you suspect avian influenza in your flock. And if you think that your birds are infected, of course, the first you can contact the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. You are legally responsible to notify your veterinarian and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency if there is suspicious of avian influenza. We are encouraging to call your local veterinary clinic to establish contact and see if they offer small flock veterinary services. I do have here a link that you can find different practices that they will cover poultry as well. If you do spot a sick or dead wild bird, anyone that will find such things are encouraged to contact the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative and do not touch that bird. And be prepared to submit details like where you found the bird or discuss options for carcass submission to allow them to gather information about the health of wild population. And let's hope that we're going to have a very low events during this fall, and then less birds to be affected and less outbreaks.
That's great, Lucy.
Thank you.
And we can bring Dr. Brian Stevens on to share some insights on the wild bird world.
Thanks, Ashley. So just in case some of you don't remember me, I'm the wildlife pathologist for the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative, and our main goal is wildlife disease surveillance. So definitely, as Lucy had mentioned, if you do have any sighting of a sick or dead wild bird, please contact us. Charlotte's going to throw our contact information up there. Definitely check out our website when it comes to keeping an eye on avian influenza in the wild bird population. I'm just going to throw up one PDF here. This is from our website. It is just a biweekly report that we put together. So this is looking at the past 2 weeks up to September 19th where we've tested. And you can see in Ontario, we've tested 29 wild birds and 9 have come back matrix positive. Not all of those are necessarily going to be H5N1, but the majority of them are. So we are starting to see cases here in Ontario as well when it comes to our wild birds. And then it also shows up to date the number of cases that we've had. And you can see we've had 67 confirmed as H5N1, but the vast majority of this 134 are going to be H5N1. Other things that I want to mention when it comes to CWHC. So with wild birds, the species that we're looking for to test for avian influenza are the water birds, so waterfowl, shorebirds. So we're talking about ducks, geese, gulls, things like that. All the raptors, the hawks, eagles, and owls, And then the scavengers, so the turkey vultures, the crows and ravens, because those are the species that we've really seen come up positive the most frequently. When it comes to songbirds, we always get the question is, when do I report a songbird? Because songbirds can show neurological signs from other things. Typically when songbirds are sick, it's secondary to window strike, so flying into a window, or predation by domestic cats. So we ask that people, if you just find a single songbird, we're not going to bring that one in. But if you find 3 or more songbirds within a little area, so within a few hundred meters of each other, within a day or 2 of each other, definitely contact us about that, because that indicates that something bigger may be going on with the songbirds in that area. And we would want to get those songbirds in to examine and test. The other thing I wanted to show you just quickly was where we're seeing cases in Southern Ontario right now. So this is just a quick map I put together today, and it just shows where we've had our positive cases in the fall so far. And these are not confirmed H5N1, these are H5 PCR positive, so suspect cases. But you can see all across southwestern Ontario, up into the Kawartha Lakes region. I've had questions about Owen Sound, and we have had reports out of Owen Sound. We just haven't had any of those geese come in for testing yet. But it is something that we assume that it's in the wild bird population up there as well. Right now, we haven't got any cases from Eastern Ontario. It doesn't mean it's not out there. It could be that these cases just haven't been reported to us yet. Some of these cases may be on the way to us, or else it may be that we haven't been able to gather enough information from that region of the province to really determine the severity of the disease out there right now. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention was about migration. So I'm not an expert on migration by any means. My expertise is in the disease aspect of this. But I reached out to Chris Sharp from the Canadian Wildlife Services because he does work on that for his career. So I'll just read you what he responded to me about migration. So he had said that migration will vary depend on the species. Many species such as warblers, aerial insectivores have already gone through, while others such as tundra swans and sea ducks might not arrive in significant numbers until November or December. The peak migration for waterbird species that we commonly associate with AIV is likely late October or November. And the other thing that he wanted to mention was that just because migration will end doesn't mean the risk will go away. Many waterbird species overwinter in Southern Ontario in large congregations of mixed flocks. And these congregations, coupled with the cooler temperatures, might help this virus to spread. So he just wanted people to be aware that you need to remain vigilant from now through the spring, because it's unlikely that this is going to go away completely over the winter months. And I'm definitely happy to answer any questions later on, and I'll probably just answer one now that I assume will come up later. We have not detected any songbirds yet. We are definitely testing every songbird that comes in, but as of now in Ontario, none of the songbird species have come out positive yet.
Okay, thank you, Brian. That was a really good overview as well. And I think that message of staying vigilant is going to come at you from Al Dam.
So folks, we've got the band back together. We're back to where we were in the spring, and it's going to be, unfortunately, I think it's going to be a wilder ride than we had earlier. I'm going to share my screen so you guys can actually see what I'm looking at here, so I can show you some of the resources that are available for you. So you can see the PIC website here, the Biosecurity and Disease site. There's a lot of information up here that is as up to date as we can make it, including resources that I'm going to show you here, some of the CFIA movement control and permit email addresses, and some of the things that Luci talked about. But grand scheme of things, this is what we're dealing with in Ontario right now. You'll see these gray zones. These are the revoked zones, most of them from the spring. This is our new zone down in Zora Township, complete with a primary control zone and an infected zone. Vash was mentioning that some of the ones, like there was one in Owen Sound, that's not on here because there was no primary control zone. around some of those other sites. When you look up this way out east, Quebec still has some zones that were up from August. And if we zoom out a little bit, we can see what's going on out west, where there is a lot of activity right now. This is some of the scary things that we're dealing with. The West is really struggling right now. We may be in the same boat, so don't think we're safe. When it comes to resources, CFIA has their avian influenza page right now. There's lots of information on there. You can see we have an avian influenza page also, which includes webinars that we're on right now, which includes the minister's order information. I think Charlotte posted that on the chat already, and just a pile more information about the disease itself and some of the updates that are happening. Just to give you an idea, US or APHIS in the US, they post all their sites also. That is on the PIC website. You can pull this page up and refresh it on an as-needed basis. One of the maps I like to show is the Usgs map here that shows US and Canada in terms of what we're seeing in terms of positive. So the red dots are commercial poultry, and you can see, and this was updated on the 24th. I refreshed it tonight. They haven't updated it until more recently, but there's a lot of red dots on there in Canada and the US. These are some of the big poultry states, but there's lots of wild birds, lots of backyard. And then the one thing I want to show you, and Brian mentioned this, that we are seeing mammals, and mostly scavengers, that we're finding with H5N1. And some of these come up as neurological issues. So this is, fortunately now, for now, it seems like it's a dead end in the mammalian species, so we hope it stays that way. As far as other resources go, the Ontario Animal Health Network has resources for poultry, both for commercial and small flock. So if we go on the small flock site, my computer might be still struggling here, there'll be resources on the small flock side, including disease surveillance reports and various resources available. If we go back on the commercial poultry site, there is the same information, just based more toward our commercial poultry operations, including some really good infographics like this one about avian influenza and how it spread, how to recognize it, and how to try and prevent it. Furthermore, Brian mentioned this, so this is a good segue from what Brian says. There is avian influenza in our wild bird population. Don't get too hung up on the fact as to where are these zones or where are these IPs. It is everywhere. Just assume it's everywhere. Canadian Wildlife Services have put together a poster about how to stop the spread of disease in wild birds. And a big part of it is stop feeding wild birds in terms of at parks and whatnot, because that is a way to gather birds and that they can commingle and then spread the disease themselves. And a big thing, separating wild and domestic birds from each other. Now, furthermore, this is the wildlife dashboard with CFIA, where Brian is uploading information. It's not as current as we'd like because there's just a lot of stuff going on right now. Things are being tested. But when it comes to wild birds, we have resources on the OMAFRA site that talk about suggestions for deterring migratory birds from your property. This was done in conjunction with Canadian Wildlife Services when we wrote this how long ago, and it has been updated. Long and short is, whether it's domestic or whether it's migratory or non-migratory birds, you just can't go out and start shooting. You need to have proper permits for scaring and hazing, and you can get permits for kill to scare permits. Give you an idea as to what is actually going on the wild bird side. This was from today or last night, and I stopped it here to show you how many million birds were in the air over at any one time. So there was over 500 million birds flying around heading south. So you see the direction of the arrows is how they're flying. we back it up here. This is birdcast. The red line here is nightfall or dusk. And you can see the amount of birds. Actually, it's, yeah, over 700. Well over 500 million birds, 3/4 billion birds are flying around at any time. This birdcast, you can go to any day and go back and pick, but we are, and this is dawn. So a lot of bird movement happens at night. And at night, during the day, they come down and rest and feed, and that is one of the potential challenges you'll have. Finally, as Brian said, if you find wild birds on your property, they're acting Wildlife Health Cooperative. The number is on the PIC website. Ontario, it is this number, the 866-673-4781 number. And finally, what we're seeing with a lot of scavengers, including turkey vultures. Turkey vultures have been dying from this H5N1, which means they're carrying it. So if you're messing up your dead stock management, if you're not managing your dead birds or your dead livestock properly, you could be inviting even influenza onto your farm with the scavengers that come to that. So be aware of proper dead stock management. We have a complete dead stock page on our website that talks about that. There is a lot of things to think about. We want to scare you, absolutely. We want you to do the right thing. We want you to not be one of those folks that become part of this horrible story. And to be brutally honest, there's probably a good chance we're going to see more backyard flocks before this fall is out, or small flocks, or birds housed extensively housed outside. They're going to potentially become positive for avian influenza. We don't want to see that. You guys have a lot of control over that, so we need to spread the message. Now, I know for the 44 or so of you guys that are on board, we're kind of preaching the converted, but we need you to spread the message too. Spread the message about these webinars that people are asking about it. Spread the message about the fact that we shouldn't be commingling it, with this minister's order. And just like I said, it's really in our hands right now. There's only so much that we can do tonight, but they're going to hopefully be helping us. And with that, I'll pass it back to Ashley.
That's great. Thank you, Al. And that's a good point. We have a long series happening between now and December. Our aim is to continue to provide little tidbits, little pieces of information and different themes each week. We're hoping that the activity on the AI positive sites is a little quiet. We don't know how that's going to roll out, but certainly we're going to continue on that education piece every single week. So we are done with our formal presentations. I do see there's a question here from Diane. And again, folks are welcome to enter their questions in here. So the question, I'm not sure if that's for Al or Lucy, but are small flocks safe in enclosed runs with steel covered roofs? And should free ranging be completely off bounds in Sarnia and Lambton County or anywhere really?
You want to take this, Lucy, or shall I, or Brian want to take it? Okay, so I'll take a run at it. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. No small flock is safe. Let's just say that. You can have an enclosed run, you can have an enclosed building, but if your biosecurity is crappy and you step in goose poop and walk in and not change your boots, we can even get it, and that's how we've gotten in commercial barns. So yeah, best you can do to separate wild birds from your domestic birds. Should free ranging be completely off bounds? I don't know. Do you like your birds? Do you like your birds alive? We should assume, and I think it'd be safe to assume, that every wild bird could potentially be a carrier of AI, especially our waterfowl that were coming around. So anything you can do to keep them separate. Are we going to say don't free range birds? No, we can't say that. As a ministry, we can say that. I don't think our order or our enforcement can do that. But if we end up in a situation where birds start dying, CFIA will have to come in and deal with that as they see fit. And that may include killing everything on your property, including all your birds, your pet birds, anything with feathers. So it's up to you based on your risk. Lucy, do you have anything to add to that one?
Not much, but I want to remind you about, because in North America, the most transmissible route for the virus was from the wild birds. Not so much with like 85%. 85% in Europe was between the farms, but they were like very crowded there. So in our case here, we're still considering wild birds being a main transmission for. So.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too when you think about the commercial poultry barns, which are completely enclosed, and they do obviously have lots of good ventilation and stuff, but they have very high security, biosecurity practices in place, and yet somehow this disease is still entering the barns. And so when we consider shelters around our backyard flocks, if you compare it to a steel barn, you know, compared to maybe a steel roof or something, it's out there, to Al's point, and it's very tricky. So the biosecurity practices, the changing of the clothes and the boots, scrubbing down, monitoring how many trucks are coming in and out of the driveway, all of that stuff's really, really important.
I think that's a good segue into your second question there about rats and avian flu spread. Rats live outside the barn, right? They need a hole the size of a quarter to get in. Rats live outside the barn, mice live in the barn, so rats are moving in and out, they're going to water. But what are they going to? Potentially the pond where you got some wild ducks in. So rodents can definitely be vectors for this disease as well as yourself.
Is there any other vectors that people should be aware of, Al?
Your dog, your kids, everything, right? So whatever is going into that coop could potentially be bringing something in. Lucy, wasn't there even some discussion about whether flies carry the disease?
Yes. There was a study being done in Japan, and then they confirmed that flies can transmit the avian flu to the virus.
Okay, so there's a question about variants. So is there more than one variant of this flu circulating, or does it depend on which country you're in? How does that work?
So there are like two types of avian influenza viruses, the low pathogenic and then highly pathogenic. The ones that they're reported, well, they're more aggressive, they're H5, H7. And the current variant that is circling in North America is the Eurasian H5N1 strain. However, right now it looks like it's reassorting and it's recombining. So we still have the H5, but with different, under the same clade, the 2, 3, 4, 4B. Yes.
Okay.
So it's one with multiple subtypes.
Okay.
I know Brian has something else to say. Okay.
No, that's from what I've heard from the virologist is that, yeah, there are minor changes, but it's still the H5N1 is the major one that's circulating in Ontario or in Canada.
Okay, so those appear to be the questions for now. One more second in case anyone else has any burning questions. If not, thank you to all of our speakers. Oh, sorry. Have any poultry showed any immunity, and how can we tell if the birds have to be euthanized when they're testing positive?
What do you mean by poultry? So if we're talking about chickens and turkeys, we're pretty much seeing a lot of birds getting nuked, and we're killing them because of trade issues and because of the thread.
And most of them are dying because of the virus, so not much is left. It's high mortality.
So once the birds get it, there's really no going back. It's basically they're on a pathway to a painful death. Otherwise, the humane option is euthanasia.
Yeah. Maybe I'll get Brian to talk a little bit about wild birds though and waterfowl, because that's another group. And we have domestic ducks too. Like a lot of people have ducks, and that's another bit of a weird one. So can you describe what happens with wild birds?
Yeah, so I mean, wild birds are thought to be the species that are carrying this. So we don't know exactly which species of wild bird is likely carrying this avian influenza, but it's known that in general, wild ducks, wild geese, a lot of them will get infected with the virus. Some of them may show severe signs and die from it. Many others may not. They may only show very minor signs. Many may become asymptomatic as well, so not showing any signs. But even in that time, they could still pass on the virus to other birds within the flock. bring it onto properties that have poultry and transmit the virus that way. And we don't know the exact percentage of wild birds that are severely affected by this versus ones that are just asymptomatic carriers. And we don't know how long that they would carry the virus as well. It could be days, weeks, longer potentially. So with the wild bird side of things, it really depends on the species of wild bird. I'd mentioned that Canada geese seem to be relatively susceptible to this. Bald eagles, turkey vultures are also dying from it, but we don't know enough about our ducks and other geese to know which ones are really carrying it around and spreading it across the continent.
And I guess that brings us to some of the domestic waterfowl that we have too as a potential asymptomatic carrier, and that's part of why we have the order, because if you're bringing ducks to an auction and they're carrying AI that they picked up from wild ducks, they may be asymptomatic, they may not be sick yet, but then it could spread to the other birds in that at that auction or at that gathering or the commingling site. And then you've got that, we know this term from COVID, that super spreader event where we spread the disease far and wide. And then we'll see that because poultry, like chickens and turkeys, will start dying in the next 3 to 5 days, and then it's a mad trace back to try and find out where it came from. So that's, the disease is host adapted to waterfowl, and when it jumps to other species, that's when we see this, I'm going to say catastrophic mortality.
Okay, so we've got a question here about, are they working on a vaccine, or what's the status of vaccines? And maybe we can kind of build on that and talk about what are some strategies for keeping the flocks safe.
So even though the vaccinating poultry is currently possible, it's not entirely straightforward because inactivated vaccines have been developed for H5H7 subtypes, but their use in practice is limited. And there are some disadvantages because they're not suitable as emergency vaccines in an outbreak when you need to vaccinate many birds in such a short space of time. And each chicken needs to be vaccinated individually, preferably twice, and that's not something you can do quickly. They only protect against one specific subtype of the virus, and this because existing vaccines work by stimulating the antibody response against the virus's protein. And they're constantly changing, and it's difficult to predict which avian influenza virus will be next to appear. I do know that in France, they're working on a vaccine on ducks, and I do also know they are looking for some novel type of vaccine, but that's going to be very expensive. That's in Netherlands. And in the United States, they are looking to develop some vaccines, but nothing has been approved. They were hoping by the end of 2023, the end of the year 2023, to have some.
Okay. So in the meantime, what tools are we using? Biosecurity, all of that kind of stuff?
And it's not always effective once the virus is already present. So like it would be more sense to start vaccinating chickens in high density poultry areas once we're aware that an outbreak is happening, but there are many other reasons why they are not recommended to vaccines, because it may be trade implication. So the virus cannot be detected or be falsely detected because the birds were vaccinated. So biosecurity is the most important thing to take care about the birds and then keep them safe.
So I think long and short of it, don't count on a vaccine to save us anytime soon, or even when we have a vaccine. As we said, good biosecurity, keeping your birds from the wild birds. We struggle with that because we have a very vibrant organic poultry industry in Ontario, and they're terrified of having their birds lost. That's on the chicken and turkey side.
And high-path avian influenza isn't the only disease floating around in our flock communities. So we've got ILT and some other diseases that the biosecurity is obviously that good line of defense. So that's a great Great question. So I think this question is for our CFIA friends. If you, Vaishnavi and Cassandra, want to pop on here. So the question is about the infected premises listed in Brant County and Grimsby. Why are they not having control zones around them? Can you just kind of clarify that?
Thank you, Ashley. Yeah, so as I said before, that really depends on if we determine it has poultry versus non-poultry. And that's based on like World Organization Animal Health, which we use the definition of poultry. So I know like when we say poultry, we consider like kind of chickens, birds, but that's really not the main criteria. If there's a main criteria over here that we consider a sale of like live birds or products from that. So if there's no sale, then we'll determine it as non-poultry, but there's other criteria as well, which we have to ask the premise producer some questions, and based on that, we determine if it's going to be a poultry premise or a non-poultry premise. And if it's determined as a non-poultry, there's no primary control zone around it.
Okay.
Does that answer Krista's question too, Ashley?
I think so, yeah. So Krista, you were asking about the difference between a small flock farm and a non-poultry operation. So I think Vaishnavi just answered that.
Yeah. We're also talking about like indoor parrots. So that it becomes a bit more complicated. If something like a parrot gets infected, not only is CFIA involved, but it's also going to be the health unit.
Right, because it's in the household.
Yeah.
And so is it a small flock farm if you just kind of have your own backyard flock and you're only using the eggs for your own consumption, or is that non-poultry? How would you classify that?
So I know non-poultry, if there's no sale of products that you're not like basically commercially selling it to someone, that's where like one of the major criteria is the sale of like the products, so like eggs from the birds or like the live birds itself, and the products of that bird is considered as like poultry. There's a definition to it, which the CFIA kind of has to use to determine between poultry and non-poultry. So even if it's just like a backyard flock, but like you're not doing any kind of sales from that from your flock, it might be considered non-poultry too, but that's like, I'm not the expert on that. I'm looking at Cassandra. Cassandra, if you want to add something, I'm not sure, but like that's pretty much what I understand from our definition of poultry versus non-poultry. Yeah.
No, Vaish, I would completely agree with you. There is a series of questions we ask. It's not a cut and dry scenario that we can lay out black and white. Every infected premise is looked at, different risks on it, and that is how they determine whether it will be poultry or not.
Yeah. And I guess looking at the Owen Sound case, where there was, as it said, nearly 100 various birds in outdoor sanctuary, that those birds weren't being sold, they weren't being eaten.
Yeah, and there's a series of questions. So like it took some time for us to determine between poultry and non-poultry, and that's like our experts in the ops branch who basically ask a series of questions. And it's not just like, as Cassandra said, not just black and white. There's a gray area to it, and it all depends on what answers we get to the questions that we are asking. And then it comes to the determination of poultry and non-poultry over there.
And it could include things like genetics, like you might be selling, you know, it may not just be meat or eggs. You might be in the business of selling genetics or like show poultry or whatever, but you'll have to take that on a case-by-case basis, right?
That's correct.
All right. I
can share the poultry definition and non-poultry definition based on the OIE terrestrial code. And if you do see those, do you see the slides?
Yep.
Okay. So one has trade implication, the other one does not have any trade implication.
Okay.
I'll just leave it a little bit for everybody to read.
Okay, I think that's helpful.
Okay.
Thank you, Lucy. And we've got a question about what are the best biosecurity practices for footwear? Are we talking boot covers, dips? Is there any products that we can talk about? How should we safely enter your backyard flock and groups?
So I'll start. I have a hate-hate relationship with bass because they only work the first time you use them, right? And you use them, you use the product for label specifications, right? If you look at some of the products like Burcon or whatever, some of the stuff you can get at the local co-op or PV Mart, some of the contact times are pretty long, right? 10 minutes, 5 minutes. Are you standing in that bath for that? Like, I'd rather you just have dedicated footwear in the coop. The problem becomes, how diligent are you in keeping that? Do you actually have a clean zone and a dirty zone, or do you have a smear zone? Are you actually changing your boots and keeping your outside boots outside and your boots for the coop inside and dedicated that way? You know, I laughed this spring. I think I cried because it was so ridiculous when people were spraying their Crocs with Lysol. Like, what, you know, when they're walking from outside to inside. So just, you know, just be aware that complete separation of clean and dirty is going to be needed. If you're going to use a foot bath of some sort, and change it regularly, and use a product that's got biocidal properties. There's a lot of good products out there, so just, you know, pick a product. But like I said, if you don't change it properly, you could actually be spreading disease into your flock from your boot tip.
And on the PIC website, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, we've got a whole bunch of slide decks that kind of outline visually what different biosecurity practices can be. They're not necessarily tailored for a small flock, but I think the concepts still kind of carry over. So hopefully those resources are a little bit helpful. So we have another question for our CFIA friends. If there's not a primary control zone established, is the rest of the process still the same? I'm assuming in an active AI population. So is it depopulation and cleanup, or what happens?
Yeah, so I'm just sharing my screen here. That's the pathway for the revocation of PCZ, but it also talks about the individual infected premise, where it basically lays out all the process that we have to do. So this depop, disposal, primary decontamination, kind of the steps are still taking place on the individual IP, even though the PCZ's not there. So you're, in this case, like when there's no PCZ, you're just looking at the first chart here and making sure that steps are being taken care of rather than looking at the whole chart. And Cassandra can like put any other steps on it, but like, yeah, you basically are going through the whole process for that particular IP to be released.
Yes, what Vash says is correct. Everything on the IP stays the same. The main thing when a PCZ is not declared, the movement restrictions that are associated with that PCZ aren't happening. So those within that 10-kilometer range at the time do not have movement restrictions placed on them. They do not need to contact us for permits or testing for pre-movement permits allowed.
Okay. Thank you. That's a really great visual, I think. Good. Jumped the gun a little too soon last time. If there's any last questions.
Actually, I can't remember. Is this being recorded and will be posted?
Yes, good point. So this is always going to be recorded. It's going to be posted each week on our website and then archived on our YouTube page. And I also noticed the links are available through the OMAFRA site. So all these resources are here forever. Okay, seeing no further questions. Again, I just want to thank everyone for joining us here on a rainy Tuesday night. Hopefully everyone picked up something new. And again, we're back again next week with most of the same experts on the line. The theme for next time is what to look for in terms of high path avian influenza, how you might identify it, how you can prevent it in your operations. So we're going to do a little more deep dive into biosecurity practices and a little bit more on the emergency preparedness for some of the other things that could go on. So once again, thank you all very much, and we'll see you again soon. Stay safe till then.